Hello, and welcome to the Never Ending Experiment. This is Kim Anderson. This is episode 9. And this episode, I'm going to be talking about artificial reproduction. So, the subject of artificial reproduction is something that has slowly come into my awareness. I think the first time that I sort of saw that there was anything even like what they're doing now was probably back in the 90s. I remember seeing ads on the bus for surrogacy, and I knew just a little bit about what that was. And I kind of thought, oh, that's interesting that they can do that a woman could carry a child for someone else. I didn't think much of it. It seemed like a pretty obscure thing, and it just seemed kind of neat. So, the reason why I have a lot more focus on it now is just the life experiences that I've had, specifically with my family, and also my education in genetics and epigenetics, and just my awareness of early childhood trauma. So, it's kind of intersected with my life in a number of different ways because of that. There really are a lot of different things going on with artificial reproduction. So, first of all, I should probably define what that even is, because it's a number of different things now. So, it's basically when you have reproduction without the normal way of reproducing in nature, which is usually just sex and then conception and then pregnancy and then birth. And so that's the natural process that we have in most species, and especially in ours. And artificial reproduction is when that process is interfered with in some way in order to promote having a child without necessarily having sex. Now, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, that does go against the basic principles of evolution as I see it, because there are reasons, I believe, why, as a social species, it's probably a better thing that the sexual part of it is there because it's part of being close with another human being. And also, in the natural sense, I think that physical attraction is also part of our genetics and it's part of our evolution as well. To be attracted to certain individuals, I believe, has a biological basis, which is beneficial to us. And now, artificial reproduction goes against a lot of that. And I think it's sort of adding on to other older forms of artificial reproduction. So we can start with the oldest form, and this was in biblical times and possibly even before, which is traditional surrogacy. So that's when a woman basically has a child for someone else. That's also the basis of the handmaiden. That was the old term for it, handmaid or handmaiden. Now we have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which has now been turned into a television series. And so that basically goes against the basis of maternal bonding. So when you take a child away from its mother and give it to a different mother, that causes trauma. And birth itself is a trauma. And when you take a baby away from the body that was nurturing it for 9 months, that is another trauma. So even that traditional form of surrogacy is very traumatic, usually for the surrogate or the handmaiden, and also for the infant. And it is a form of human trafficking because you are treating a child like an object and not like a real human being who can make bonds with each other. So that's before any sort of technology got involved. Now, today we have all kinds of other technology that's involved in artificial reproduction. IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is the biggest change. Now, the first IVF child that was born It's only a couple years older than myself. So what that means is that there is no long-term research on what the long-term effects are of IVF. We don't know if they are going to die young, and it's very probable that that will be the case. There's been the fact that there is not a lot of research kind of shows you that they don't want people to know the truth about it. They don't want to really look at it objectively. And the reason for that is people really want babies. The pronatalist obsession is really, really focused on having babies. And I feel like now we're really accommodating that mentality. We're really saying it's okay to hurt a kid as long as you get one. And I think that's really sad. And I definitely think it's very harmful. So, IVF, nowadays you can combine surrogacy and IVF. So, what they're doing now is taking a different person's egg through egg extraction, which is also another harmful procedure. And during egg extraction, the natural process of epigenetic reprogramming is removed. So, again, another layer of nature's way of taking care of us that we are removing just out of the desperation to have a child. Sometimes it's not even desperation to have a child, it's just, it is a very controlling way to have children. And amazingly, some people that are able to carry a child normally are using IVF because they've been sold the idea that it's somehow better. And it really isn't better. I mean, the research that's coming out now is showing very clearly that IVF causes a lot more problems. And surrogacy, in addition to that, causes even more problems. That's both for the baby and for the mother that's going through the process. And that includes egg extraction and IVF and the pregnancy. Now, naturally, the body will get rid of any attack on it like that, any insult that involves an attack on their immunity. And so a lot of women are given drugs to suppress their immunity in that unnatural pregnancy. So that, of course, increases the risks yet again. So we've got the shutdown of natural processes and the increase in insults to the body of both of these people, the infant and the gestational mother. Now, it's really hard for me to fully understand it, and I kind of have to go back to that innocent place where I was when I saw that ad on the bus and just thinking, oh, that's neat. Because I think a lot of people are still there. They think, oh, that's neat. And they're really manipulating a lot of people who don't have a strong basis in biology to believe that it's okay or even superior to use these technologies to have a child. Now, some of that is about the idea of selection because they try to sell people the idea that you can select different embryos, but the fact is that you can't really test the DNA of a zygote or a very small embryo for the reason that they don't have enough DNA to give away. You know, when conception happens, you've got two half cells essentially, the egg and the sperm, and they come together and they form a cell, and then that cell starts to multiply. Well, if you only have 16 cells in a little zygote, you can't take one away without seriously harming that zygote. So the idea of selection even being a part of what's going on with these embryo selection, I think, is pretty false. Simply because it's almost impossible to know the DNA or the outcome, the final expression of what those genes are going to be. But meanwhile, while you're trying to do that, you are interfering with the actual natural development of that future human. So we have the elimination of epigenetic reprogramming, and what that is in a normal conception and pregnancy, the zygote or the embryo will go through this process. And again, when an egg is fully formed naturally in the body, it will also go through this process. And essentially, it eliminates the epigenetic marks on the genome. So if you can imagine your genome, this DNA, has a lot of things going on with it, and that's part of epigenetics. So the epigenetics has these little chemical signals on it that are making changes. So it's not that the DNA does everything on its own. It has a lot of other chemicals that it's interacting with in order to express those different genes. It's kind of like the parallel I would say is like putting your dirty clothes directly into the dryer and saying that it's going to be clean in the end, but you didn't wash it. So that's kind of what you do when you don't have epigenetic programming, because that epigenetic programming basically gives like a blank slate to this new human being, this new infant that can start over without the burden of whatever was going on with its parents' genome. So in IVF conception, that epigenetic programming that's supposed to happen a second time is also eliminated. So if you have an artificial egg extraction and you have IVF, you've eliminated 2 of the epigenetic reprogramming that is meant to help this new being be healthy. You're eliminating that healthy aspect of being able to start over as a new human being. So it's harmful. It's absolutely harmful. So you've got so many different layers of eliminating healthy natural processes and adding on artificial unhealthy processes in order to force a child. So how I see it now is essentially like it's cellular rape is what happens. That's what IVF is. So normally in a normal conception, you have these sperm and they're all swimming like little creatures, which is really incredible when you think about it, that these little half cells are active and behaving like a normal animal, right? Like these little snakes or little fish, right? We've all seen the image of that. Now, in IVF, what you do is you take those sperm and you freeze them. And obviously, that's, again, an insult. It's a harm to those little sperm. And then you unfreeze them, and instead of allowing them to come back to life and go after the egg, and usually the strong ones will make it there and the weaker ones won't. And that's also another part of evolution, right? That the sperm that makes it is usually one of the healthier ones that's able to make it that far. It's able to get to the egg. It's able to implant into the egg, and then you have conception. But what IVF does is it takes any old sperm. They're not really able to determine whether it's a healthy sperm or not. And they forcibly inject it directly into the egg. So that eliminates that whole part of evolution again. So you have a forced conception, which of course would damage the egg, damages the sperm, because oftentimes both of them have already been frozen for a while. Again, another damage. And I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to understand that freezing a living thing is going to damage it. Even if you freeze a vegetable or an actual egg, like a chicken's egg, you can't freeze it properly. It won't come out the same. It won't be the same in the end. So any of those sperm or eggs or embryos that are being frozen are being damaged in the process, without a doubt. So in the IVF pregnancy now, you have an artificial conception that's happened in vitro, so in a little test tube, outside of the mother's body, so outside of that area where the mother's body might reject it. And as human beings, we reject a lot of embryos. And that's simply because we're genetically very weird. You know, a lot of our genetic abnormalities are rejected by the body, and the placenta is a very difficult place to implant into on purpose. You may have heard of an ectopic pregnancy, and what that means is when the embryo implants elsewhere in the body and starts to grow there. So that means that the placenta actually does not want any old embryo implanting into it. It is very selective, and it will reject a lot of the embryos for basically not being healthy enough. So as I mentioned, in order to get that pregnancy going, they give the gestational mother a large amount of immune-destroying drugs, which can cause all kinds of health problems. They often will give her hormones as well to trick her body into acting as though it's pregnant. So the pregnancy is often going to be a lot more difficult when you have someone else's child within you. Now, that kind of immune defense can happen also in a regular pregnancy, and that just comes from a genetic mismatch, essentially. So, just like we can react to different foods, sometimes we have sensitivities or allergies. It's similar with a pregnancy. When you have someone else's DNA in your body may not like it for various different reasons. There's so many different genes going on, and actually, what happens in a human pregnancy is that there is a blood attachment between the fetus and the mother. So after the embryo implants into the placenta, it creates a blood bond. So there's a direct blood connection in both directions between a fetus and a mother in the human being. And that doesn't necessarily happen with all other animals. Cats and dogs, for example, don't have that direct blood bond. So that's what happens in a human pregnancy, and that's what makes it even more dangerous, and it makes the bond between mother and child even more extreme. Now, we live in a very strongly, predominantly patriarchal society. Almost every culture and country on earth right now is majority patriarchal. It's not always patriarchal in practice, in the sense that the man is the head of the household and that he is the more dominant parent. The actual reality is often very different, and I'm going to talk more about that in my next book. That does have an influence on all of the artificial reproduction. I see artificial reproduction as sort of an extreme next step for patriarchy. And of course, the Bible is very patriarchal. And the reason I'm so against that is really just biology. We are mammals. So a mammal is an animal where the mother is the most important parent, and the mother not only gestates and has the pregnancy of its offspring, but also feeds the offspring after they're born with milk. That's where the mammalian part comes in. Now, that's so deeply embedded within us. So we are an even more mammalian mammal than a lot of other mammals. Think of that. We're even more tightly bonded from mother to infant than other animals. And yet we live in a patriarchal culture. So that is not a good position for us to be in at all. And artificial reproduction takes that dissociation from that close blood bond and pushes it even further away. So it really, really tears apart the essence of what it means to be human and increases the difficulties of our already precarious genetic state as human beings. Now, the outcomes for the pregnancies of IVF and surrogacy pregnancies are very poor. So we've already seen the outcomes. We know for a fact that they are all high risk. A lot of them are cesarean sections without even trying for natural birth. And that's also become a new trend for women to not even try to have a natural birth, but just schedule a cesarean when it's convenient for them without following any of these signs of the body and whether or not you're ready to give birth. Now we can see that this just tramples all over evolution and all over the natural process of selection. Now, selection is a hard thing to talk about with human beings because it's been embedded with a lot of political associations, with Nazis, with eugenicists, with racism. But really, the basis of selection, natural selection, is simply that the healthiest people will be the ones more likely to have kids and to have those kids survive. That's just nature. So you can't really be angry at selection when that's part of nature. So what we have now is this idea that we can just go against natural selection. And now we are forcing a whole different level of artificial selection. But it's going in the opposite direction of what would be best for human health. So we are purposefully now pushing for high-risk pregnancies. It's almost as if they just decided to let go of all of that research that's been done over the last decades to help women have better pregnancies, all of that healthy stuff, healthy eating, vitamins. It's like saying, forget about all that. You know what? Go ahead, drink, smoke, do cocaine. Doesn't matter. All that matters is that you have a kid. Whether it's healthy or not, we don't care. Whether you're healthy or not, we don't care. Whether someone else dies getting a baby for you, we don't care. We've lost all of that empathy and that natural bonding in the whole conversation. It's not just that we're cutting that off for the individual going through these unhealthy processes. We seem to have shut down the conversation completely that health even matters at all. And part of that is that there's so much medical intervention that people think that it's like this magical cure for everything, and that if you just go to the hospital, everything will be fine, and you can torture your child, you can harm yourself, and it doesn't matter. Now, a lot of people are getting aware that these are negative things. A lot of men are saying, I don't think I want to be a sperm donor. I don't think I want to have a bunch of kids out there that I don't know, even if they do or don't want kids of their own. They're starting to understand that it's maybe going to be a bad thing, and they may be getting a phone call or an email down the road, a knock on the door saying, hey, Dad. And they're like, I didn't agree to be your dad. And it's like, well, I didn't agree to be born. I didn't agree to be born with someone with no dad. And now it's no mom. Who's your mom? We don't even know. And a lot of countries are making it very difficult for people to even find out whether or not there was any intervention in their birth. They may be having all kinds of health problems throughout their life, and they thought that they had a normal birth, and they may find out in some other way that that's wrong, that actually their parents aren't their real parents, that actually they were bought and sold like a piece of meat, and maybe they even were gestated in another country, maybe in Ukraine during a time of war, that their birth mother didn't even speak their language, was going through maybe all kinds of trauma and PTSD, desperate for money. And so all she could think to do was to rent out her own body and sell her own child. That's going to be a normal story in the future. So I don't want to say I worry a lot. I think worry isn't really helpful. But I really believe the next generation is going to suffer so much because of how much people are using artificial reproduction. It's really getting out of control. And they're uncovering all kinds of criminal operations in different countries. There's been, I think, Cyprus, Georgia, Nigeria, where they are slaves. The women that are giving birth are slaves. The handmaidens did not choose to be there. They're not getting paid. They were forcefully impregnated, and then they took their child from them, and they had no choices. And that's the reality for a lot of people. And of course, as these agencies get bigger and they get more and more international, because what they're doing is taking away all of the human trafficking safeguarding that used to be there. So they're removing the rules against human trafficking in order to buy and sell children internationally. And they're doing that to get around the rules because there are a lot of rules in countries still in order to safeguard children. And so basically, they're also not just opening the door for the buying and selling of children, but also the buying and selling of adults as well, and especially of young women who are being used as surrogates. So the case now is like, not only is this contributing to massive overpopulation, not only is it contributing to human trafficking, it's also contributing to mass trauma, mass health problems. The mortality rate already, the longevity of human being has been slowing down. It was increasing for quite a while, and that increase is slowing down now, and I believe that we're going to start seeing it go the other way. And already some of the surrogate children are coming of age and coming out. And, there are differences of opinions, but you have to understand a lot of those children were raised to believe that what happened to them was right. So they have been brainwashed since they were little kids to believe that surrogacy and IVF are wonderful things. And they use a lot of really non-scientific terminology, which kind of lets you know how really ignorant about science a lot of people behind this are. They use terms like extreme babysitter, or they compare it to baking cookies in an oven, baking little biscuits in an oven, and then you're just taking out of someone's oven as though a womb, as though that placenta is just an oven that's removable from the woman. This is lauded as a cure for infertility, and yet all it's doing is increasing the likelihood in the next generation of more infertility. Now, some of the people too that are being told that they're IVF may not even be IVF. Because if you are, say, a regular couple, so we'll take out the idea of surrogacy, say this is just IVF in a heterosexual couple, and they're using their egg and their sperm, and they're just going through the IVF process, a lot of married couples will continue to have sex while they're pregnant. So a lot of times what happens is that they will just have a normal child. The IVF embryo could be expelled, a new embryo, a normal pregnancy, because after this woman has taken all of these fertility drugs, it pushes her body into making more eggs, and then the possibility of having a normal pregnancy at the same time could happen. And that's already been shown to happen in some surrogate pregnancies as well. Because it's not a normal natural pregnancy, and because you're taking out all of those obstacles to getting pregnant again. I mean, in a natural pregnancy, you don't often hear about someone getting doubly pregnant again. You know what I mean? Like, once that embryo implants, it stays in there for 9 months. You don't usually get pregnant in the middle of that again with a new embryo. But in a surrogate or IVF pregnancy, that does happen. So imagine you've already got twins from your surrogate pregnancy, and suddenly another embryo is growing in there. So a lot of people, what they do is they put all kinds of rules on the surrogate. They won't allow her to have sex while she's pregnant. And that's the other thing that's really, really dark, is that the intended parents of a surrogate pregnancy can legally now put all kinds of rules in place for that surrogate during her pregnancy. They will try to dictate what kind of food she eats. They'll try to dictate what kind of exercise she does. They're going to dictate what her intimate life is like. That is dark. That is right in the line of destruction of human rights and an attack on her independence as a human being. I really feel like we need to bring back the awareness of how dangerous pregnancy is, and to stop pretending that we need more people right now when we have more people on the planet than has ever existed in all of time. And it is increasing daily, and it is not going down. The birth rate is not the total population. The total population is going up. And so long as the total population is going up, then the birth rate will naturally go down, because a birth rate is measured by the total number of people. And if you keep adding more people, then the birth rate naturally goes down, because the birth rate is just a measure of the new babies compared to the total. That's all it is. Now, besides the obsession with children, I think part of the reason why this has become so popular is the idea of pro-choice, which I think has become kind of a faulty reasoning system and also overly simplistic. So the focus for quite a while now has been on choice and on planning. The whole name, Planned Parenthood, as though you have to make a plan. And guess what? Nature doesn't necessarily follow our plans. And having a healthy pregnancy is not a matter of intention or choice or planning. It's not psychological, it's physical. There is a physical reality of pregnancy that is being denied. So my opinion now is very different than pro-choice because I believe now in pro-responsibility. I don't believe that you should be able to force a child just because of choice. I think that the health of that infant is primary. And so we need to put human health first and our choices and plans and ideas second. If they match up, great. Whether it's a gay couple, a single man, a single woman, women, man, it doesn't matter who you are. It is wrong for you to demand that another person have a child for you. And I believe we need to ban it categorically, everywhere, for all time, for all reasons, and for all creatures. Not just for us, but for other animals as well. We should really not be interfering with their evolution as well. That's my unpopular opinion. I know that there are a lot of people that are not on board with what I'm saying, but I'm looking at the science. Like I said, I was open to it before I understood what it really meant. Now that I've looked at the science and now that I've looked at the outcomes and now that I looked at how many different bad things happen in IVF and surrogacy, I am categorically against it. Thanks for your time. This is Kim Anderson. This has been The Never Ending Experiment. And I hope you tune in again in a couple weeks. Thank you.